All right, everyone. In this video, we're going to be going over iframe elements, what they're capable of, and how to find pre-built iframe elements or widgets that you can include in your HTML files. Now, as you can see, I've adjusted the layout of my little development environment here. I've increased the width of the browser and the width of my Visual Studio Code window. This is going to give me more room to work with the actual iframe elements since they do tend to be longer than most, and it's going to give me a better view to look at when I'm actually putting the widgets in place. A lot of the widgets are just too wide to work with something that's only taking up half of the screen width. So this is going to make it pretty easy, especially since you can just click on the little sliver in the background and bring it to the foreground pretty quickly. Now, before we start grabbing some pre-built widgets, let's go ahead and figure out what iframes actually do. The best way to do that is to create our own. So let's make a basic iframe element. iFrame element is going to be enclosed in iFrame tags. The leading tag, opening tag, is going to have an attribute called source. That's the very important one. Let's go ahead and navigate to Wikipedia because the source tag is going to take a URL as the parameter. So we can just go ahead and grab this and we'll go back here, input that URL in the source attribute for the iframe element. If we click save and we go back here, we can see we've got this little window that is loading the content from this URL, this page, into this micro window. So an iframe creates an element that will open a link to another URL that's passed in using the source attribute and output the display into the section that's provided. And you can adjust the width and the height of the iframe if needed, but that's essentially what iframes do. So let's go ahead and add our first widget. We don't need Wikipedia. We can just delete that. And we can head on back to the browser. Instead of going to Wikipedia, we're going to start with the Medio Blue Weather. That's probably the simplest one out of the 6 that we have. So let's look for Medio Blue Weather widget. You can see I've already been to this URL. It's purple, but if we go here, the Medio Blue site has a lot of different things you can do. They've got an API, they've got a bunch of widget tools we can use. What we're interested in is this little link right here. This is going to take us to a widget generator. I'm in Phoenix. It's incredibly warm here. My AC is actually broken right now. It's kind of tough to record this, but we can go ahead and change all these settings. And if you look down here, we've got a box that has a bunch of HTML content in it. And this changes based on the settings we punch in here. So let's just give it some wild kilometers per hour and we'll do a 5-day. Let's keep it to 4. We want to keep it a little bit thinner. With background image, no background, dark text. I like that background image a lot. So we can change it to whatever we want and it's going to modify this so that the widget we end up including does exactly what we have set the settings to. So we're just going to copy all of this content. We're not going to worry about what is in there, what it's doing, or how any of it works, because you don't really need to. You can if you want, and it's a great skill to have, but you can just paste this in, save it, head on back, and now you've got a weather widget on your file. You didn't have to create this, you didn't have to write any of the code, you just found the right resource, click the settings you want, and put the piece in the right place. That's how simple it is to include widgets in your HTML projects. It's honestly one of the best times in history to be in the software industry because there are so many powerful tools out there that are just designed to help make your life easier. Now, before we move on to grab the other widgets, I'm just going to put a copy of this in all of the other spots to see roughly how the spacing is going to look because I don't want to run out of room later on. So let's see. Okay, so we do end up with a horizontal scroll bar. I'm not a huge fan of that. So I'm going to go ahead and style these just a smidge to keep them from being too wide. So let's change 460 pixel width to 320 pixel width all the way across. If we save, now they're a little bit skinnier and that 4th day is cropped off, but that's honestly okay. We can add a scroll bar. So this says scrolling no. And the interesting thing about iframes is that they have some styling as attributes on the iframe instead. So Usually you'd have to go into the style attribute and then add something like uh, overflow X and then scroll, but iframes can have attributes that are for specific things like that. So we could just take scrolling no and do a control F. We'll replace it, and then we'll just put capital yes instead. Replace them all the way across. So now each one of these we can scroll and see all the days that we've gotten. I think this is a good width setting. So we're going to have plenty of room and nothing's going to get hedged off the edge of the page. I don't like horizontal scroll bars across the entire page. I'd much rather have them in the widget specifically. So now that we've got a rough idea of how big they need to be and how to actually put the scroll bar on there, we can go ahead and start grabbing our other widgets. All right, since we kind of skipped the Spotify section in order to do Medio Blue, let's go back and cover Spotify right now. I'm going to leave this tab open in case we want to change something later. So we'll start a new tab and we'll look for Spotify.com. I'm already logged in under my personal account. Let's open up the web player and we've got our homepage, all the different podcasts I enjoy, some of my favorite music. Let's search for a playlist and we'll go with lo-fi. Let's hit play, go to the actual playlist here. So if you go to a music playlist on Spotify in the browser, you can click on the little menu here, hit share, and then embed playlist. One of the options here is going to be to show the code. You can just copy it if you want, but here's the code if you need to see it. And we can exit out of that, and that'll give us the full view. It's again an iframe, and it has a special URL that's going to include just the playlist instead of everything that you see. So we can go ahead, move on over to our Spotify section of the table. It's a little bit smaller. Iframes are varied that way, but we can save it, head on back to our main page and see what happens. So now we've got a Spotify playlist here and we can press play and there we go. We've got some music. Before we move on, I want to make sure that all of my widgets are similar in terms of width and height. So we're going to go ahead and look for the styles in here. Ooh, it's width 100%, so it's taking up as much space as it can. Let's set that to 320 pixels. And what is the height down here for these guys? 593 is such a weird, odd number. I'm going to change that to, let's do 480. We'll replace that for all of them, and we'll also make the height 480 as well for the Spotify playlist. So hopefully these are all the same height and width now, and they do have scroll bars, so we'll have to deal with that later. We're probably going to run out of room when we end up including the Google Drive and the Google Calendar on the bottom, but as long as we can scroll and see everything, that's completely fine. Although the last two widgets were pretty easy, Facebook tends to be a little bit more finicky overall in terms of the experiences I've had with them. But they're definitely still a workable platform. So let's go ahead and navigate to, we'll do Facebook business page embed. We'll see what comes up. So the developers.facebook.com has a page plugin. We're going to go ahead and check that out. It looks like it's exactly what we're after. So they've got some settings here. We can use a small header. That looks fine to me. And you can actually check out Uglesoft's business page on Facebook. And there's our most recent post. So let's go ahead and leave all of that default. We're going to get the code. We want this to be through the Uglesoft business app. So Facebook is more complicated since you have to include the JavaScript SDK on the page and then include the actual embed, plugin, widget, whatever they want to call it. They call it a plugin here, but we're going to first grab all of this. And this is kind of complicated, but as long as you do your best to follow the instructions. So on the page once, ideally right after the opening body tag, let's just start with that. So we got to find our opening body tag, and it's going to be the very first thing we put in here. Oh, you just want to put that nice and in line. And then we'll head on back here, get the code again, grab all of this and put it where we want it. We're looking for Facebook feed. So we will paste, save, and let's see if it worked. Okay, it takes a little bit longer to load in, but we do have a Facebook page widget, and this is going to update in real time. So whenever you refresh the page or open it in the first place, it'll give you the most recent feed. And the most recent post on the Uglesoft business page is the Intro to HTML and CSS #2. Next up, we have the Facebook groups. Now, as far as I know, you can't actually include a Facebook group embed that's going to give you a feed of that group's posting history. But we can still include a link to the actual page and a little bit of information about the page. So we want to do the group plugin again on developers.facebook.com. We've got to scroll a little bit to find it. This looks about like what we're after. So I'm going to take a few groups that I know of over here in my other window, put them in here. We'll set this to 280. We'll leave it alone. That's fine. And we'll get the code. Now, you might recognize this. We included the JavaScript SDK prior, back when we were including the business page plugin. So we don't have to do that again. You only have to include the SDK once. So we can go ahead and grab all of this, copy it, and head on down to the Facebook groups. We'll paste that in and save. Let's see. There we go. Hilarious memes. Maybe you like to click and look at memes every morning. Well, this will take you right to that page. It's kind of small, so we could actually include another Facebook group. Let's head on back, exit out of this, and I will grab my other URL. So not only do I like to enjoy hilarious memes, but I also like to keep in touch with the world of HTML and CSS. So we can press get code, copy all of that, head on back here. Let's add a line break just to be safe, and we will paste in our plugin. So now we can see that we've got both our Facebook groups stacked top to bottom. The top half of our widget layout is looking pretty good, but we still have to include the Google widgets. So let's start with Google Drive. I'm just going to go ahead and search for Google Drive embed. Now, it doesn't look like Google actually has a very good support file. I mean, it looks like you can open a file and then embed that, but I want to embed my Google Drive folder. And there doesn't seem to be anything popping up other than Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is this wonderful site that allows people to ask questions and then provide answers. And I reference it probably more than any other website as a developer. So it's a good tool to look into. And somebody has a very similar question to the one that I'm asking right now, trying to figure out how to include a Google Drive folder in an embedded view. Somebody else provided a pretty good answer that got 90 upvotes. So we can look at the different views that they offer, and it looks like there's something in here called a folder ID. I'm not really sure what that is. So, oh, here it is. Here's the question. What's a folder ID and how do I get it? Turns out that it's this gigantic, weird string that's included whenever we look at a specific folder. So let's go to my Google Drive and head on over to the records folder. This is where I keep a lot of stuff, but one of the things we can do is grab this, which looks like the ID that we're after. So let's do the list view. I'm not a fan of grid view folder structures, so we're going to go ahead and head on down to Google Drive, line break, include it, and now it's not going to work quite yet. Oh, go back to the actual thing we're after. So let's copy that and replace folder ID, and we'll save it and see what happens. Looks like it worked. We've got our different folders in here. Now, it did add a big scroll bar to both the page and the widget, which I'm not a big fan of. So let's go ahead and edit the styling on here. We're going to change the height. We're not going to do 600 pixels. Let's do maybe like 320. It's a little bit more reasonable, I think. Still got a bit of a scroll bar, so we'll do 280 instead. Hopefully that'll be enough. There we go. So now we can scroll within here without having to scroll throughout the entire page. Now, I'm not a fan of the way that it's kind of a hollow background or a transparent background, so let's see if we can fix that. We're gonna go to the style and set background color to white. Add the semicolon, and now We've got a background color of white for our Google Drive. That's going to be it for our widget homepage tutorial. I hope you learned something about HTML and CSS along the way, and I hope that you have something practical and useful that you can open on your local machine every single day and play some music from, check your weather, like the posts from your favorite page, all in a single dashboard layout. I highly encourage you to keep experimenting with HTML and CSS moving forward. They're incredibly valuable tools, and I'm of the mind that everyone should know the basics of at least a few simple programming languages, and markup languages are in that same boat of very healthy fundamentals to have in the modern world. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please share it with other people you think might also enjoy it. You can also show your appreciation with a thumbs up. And if you have any ideas or requests for future tutorials, please let me know in the comments below. Until then, this has been Uglesoft's Intro to HTML and CSS tutorial series. Thanks for watching.